So what's going on, guys? Welcome back to the podcast. Today, we have two very special guests on. They are owners of Propane Fitness and also ex-finance guys that worked corporate and now moved into entrepreneurship. Johnny and Yusuf. How you doing, gents?
Oliver, thanks for having us on.
Good, man. Yeah. Thanks for having us.
Awesome. Amazing. I did a brief intro there, but guys, do you kind of just want to introduce yourselves and kind of sell yourself in 30 seconds or something like that?
This is normally where, as you can see Yusuf doing, he waits for a question to be asked and then just throws it over to me. So I always have to, especially the difficult ones. Yeah. So sure. So I'll introduce myself and then I'll let Yusuf's got a bit more of an interesting story than me. We both were like, I don't know, when did we go to uni? 2008.
Yeah.
Like right in the financial crisis, like right in the middle of it.
Oh, shit.
Both went to do, I did economics with the view to like go down the typical route, I guess. Did economics, came out of uni, joined the big accountancy firm, did 3 years as an accountant, got my ACA qualification, realized almost immediately I didn't want to do it, quit, and became an online fitness coach. And that's pretty much my story in a nutshell. So I've been doing it full time since 2016. So, and now we do kind of all sorts of bits associated with online fitness and online business. But yeah, from accountant to online fitness professional.
Pretty cool.
It's funny you mentioned that about the financial crisis because I did think the other day, like 2008, if we just took all the like fees and everything that you would have put into uni, just went long S&P, and then in 2012 you just shorted oil, you'd be set for life. That's it. You'd have 100 million in the bank,
You
sorted.
ballers. Yeah.
Yeah, wouldn't have to bother with
So
all this
simple.
online coaching business.
I know, yeah.
Pretty
So
cool.
yeah, very similar to Johnny. We went to school together, went to uni, did maths, business kind of stuff. Ended up working in finance, so I was in an investment bank, and then I decided because I was kind of deep down the rabbit hole of reading about like leucine metabolism and protein threshold and stuff, and I was like, you know what I could really do with a medical degree. So I went away and did that, and now here we are, several years later, doing propane full time. So my goal as well is once I finish my kind of medical training pre-specialty is to focus on propane full time as well.
So I think the lesson is go and get a really difficult professional qualification that takes ages, and then quit.
Yeah. But at least, you can put it in the signature of your email, right? In your
Exactly.
and
Yeah.
that's what's important, right?
That's all I did it for, really. Yeah, that and my level 3 kettlebell certification, really important.
That is so important. Yeah, amazing. So you both obviously working in finance. What sort of like steered you towards doing kind of that route instead of like jumping into kind of entrepreneurship straight away?
I think for me it was just like the conditioning of what like all my friends were doing, what my like parents and family like expected me to do, and I think the impression that entrepreneurship is something that like you do later in life is what I think I originally thought, and I especially remember thinking that there's like no money in fitness. Like I didn't actually know anyone at the time who was a personal trainer, but I just had this association of like the guys on T Nation, like they never talk about money, so presumably they aren't making any, and guys in gyms is like 20-30 quid an hour maybe. So I thought like accountant equals like Lambos, golf, like make partner 7-figure salary, and you just miss out all the stuff in the 40 years in between,
Yeah.
that isn't quite that. But yeah, I think just probably like didn't really give it much thought, to be honest, at that age. Safety, like it's what people expect, and I think my impression of the corporate world, at least when Yusuf and I joined it was kind of missold to us a little bit. Like I don't think either of us felt like day one of the job was what we expected it to be like. You get there and like the curtain slowly drops away and you're like, oh shit, like I'm in this for like for maybe like the next 40 years of my life. But yeah, that's my reason anyway.
That is huge. Yeah, that when the cold reality sets in, and you're like, this has, because you all the graduate training schemes and the careers fairs and stuff are like, oh, you'll be working in a dynamic environment with lots of high responsibility, and you'll be like, oh, cool,
Everywhere's dynamic.
yeah, and you realise what they mean by dynamic is 2 Excel spreadsheets on 2 monitors, and a room that's kind of, or an office that's maybe like 20 meters from a window, and a coffee machine that has like the kind of black ground stuff, and it's just that for so. Yeah, similar thing. Like, I just didn't have the flexibility of thought at the time to think beyond that. And actually, it was I think everyone needs to go and do something that they hate to be able to give them that contrast of, oh, actually, this is what I like. And if you're not sure what you like, do something. You'll figure out what parts of it you like and don't like, and then and you'll kind of self-correct. And it may be that corporate life is the best thing in the world, but I'd be surprised if that is the case. For me, it was figuring out that a lot of jobs optimize for one of the 4 main currencies of time, freedom of location, money, and satisfaction. And usually the jobs optimize for money, and they completely sack off the other 3 forms of currency. And it's only kind of realizing that you're like, actually, there's no tangible sense of helping anyone in this job, because you're one very cliche, but you're one very small cog in a huge machine. So that was kind of part of what took me into medicine, and obviously with coaching people, it's a very satisfying thing. You're working directly with someone and you're seeing the tangible improvements in their physique, or now in our case in their business.
Yeah, 100%. And I think you both touched on good points there. Johnny, I completely relate with you with kind of like that social pressure when it comes to getting a corporate job. And I remember, my parents, they're pretty liberal, but like they were both still driving me down the path of get a corporate job, be successful in this field, because like that's potentially what all they've ever known, right? And what they kind of expect, and they maybe don't understand the online business world. Like my dad still don't understand it when I explain to him what online coaching is. He doesn't have a clue, right?
Where are your parents from, Oliver?
So my mum is British, she's from the UK, and then my dad's from Indonesia. So
okay.
yeah, it's quite
similar to kind of Arab parents, where like, you must become a doctor or engineer or lawyer.
Yeah, I mean, usually Asian parents are pretty strict and stuff like that, but my dad wasn't strict in that sense. But I think it was kind of just the culture that he came from. He came from like a very small village in Indonesia, so they never had an internet. So when I tried to explain to him about online business, he didn't really get it, right? So it's very different there. And I think you're right, Yusuf. People like in the corporate space, the jobs, they don't optimize for like those other parts of your life, because your happiness is not just a salary that you get, right? You could go up 20k a year in a salary, but if the rest of your life's pretty rubbish, your happiness doesn't improve, right? You need this time for kind of like flexibility, being able to go on holiday, not be micromanaged. And I see a lot of newer startups do this, which is really encouraging. I think like the old corporates could learn a lot from that, in my opinion.
For sure.
Yeah. I think the income thing. So I think everyone's probably read the like the stat of like, what is it, like 60 grand a year, like $70,000 or something like that, where your happiness is supposed to be linear improvement until that threshold, and then it doesn't improve after that. And you hear that and you're like, bullshit. Like if I was earning whatever, $250,000 a year, I'd definitely be happier. And I think something you experience as a business owner that you can never experience as an employee is the up and down of like, you have a month where, for whatever reason, like maybe you're doing a launch or you open a new program or whatever, and suddenly your income like legitimately doubles or triples, and then you realize that everything else is just exactly the same. And you're like, oh, right, okay, and then you think, well, if I was back in corporate world, I'd be on this progressively, like this pay band and this pay band, and I'd get a bonus of this, and you think that ladder will make you happier and happier, because you never experience income in any other form other than from that like tap that someone slowly loosens as you kind of progress the way up and give them more and more hours of your time. But yeah, as a business owner, when you have a big month or a big year and you realize that it's still just you in front of a screen living the rest of your life, it doesn't change, suddenly you realize like, okay, like I need to focus on how, not only like how I earn the money, but also what else I do, and like how I like, do I enjoy the job and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah, 100%. I think Yusuf has gone quiet.
Here we go.
There he goes back.
Yeah, that was very Tyler Durden, Johnny.
Very Tyler Durden.
Very
Yeah,
tired.
like at the end of the day, you realise it's just you and a screen.
Yeah, the things you
Yeah.
own end up owning you.
There we
Yeah.
go. I actually went on Amazon yesterday, and I thought, you know what? Like, I haven't bought myself something nice in a while. I'm gonna splash out like I've got 100 or 200 quid to spend on something. And I was like, do you know what? Like, what do you buy? Ended
What's
up
the
not
quote
buying
from Fight
anything.
Club? Like, which IKEA desk like best represents me as a person, or whatever.
Oh
Is that-
god, yeah. Or like, do you know what a duvet is? Well, that's
God,
only
yeah.
because you're mollycoddled and yeah.
Mm.
But at this point, like the only things I would want to buy are like big things, like a bigger house or something that like significantly improves you. And actually, I learned this lesson from Johnny, which was the things that you should spend the most money on are your bed, because like total hours wise, that's the thing that you're spending the most time physically on, and like followed by your shoes and your wallet, like things that you use. Whereas spending money on your car should be quite far down the list unless you have a job that involves driving people around.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think as well, touching back on the point that Johnny said about kind of income going up and lifestyle, what I found kind of in the corporate space was as people kind of moved up their pay grade, their lifestyle would move up very quickly as well. So they'd kind of get this promotion, they'd want the newer house, they want the flashier cars, flashier watches, and like they're not actually any richer because they're actually just getting more liabilities onto their thing because they're living to the status or the comparison of what everybody else is doing, right? And I think this is big in the corporate space. It's kind of like that social pressure. You see that you've gone up this pay grade and so your colleague's got a flashier watch, so you need to match that now, and to feel like you are part of the group that you need to do that.
It's a very dangerous game.
It's so dangerous. And I feel that as potentially an entrepreneur, it's still there, but you can detach yourself from that a little bit because you're kind of more, I don't know, there's less social pressure in that sense. I don't know what you guys think about that kind of idea.
Yeah, absolutely. I've saw that a lot in the investment bank where you would get junior traders at 24 on a 100k salary and they'd be buying a like Ferrari or something, and you're like, what are you doing? Like, you can't afford a Ferrari. Like, yes, 100k is a big salary, but in terms of like leveraging yourself up to the eyebrows, it means that it's like, and we saw it this year with the current situation. I don't know if I'm allowed to say it because of the algorithms, but yeah, like people, we realized very quickly that many people are living paycheck to paycheck, and 1 month if they don't get paid, that's it. Like they need bailout, and it suggests that, and it's not as if people are living on the poverty line. These are people that have got quite decent lifestyles, but they've overextended their lifestyle way before they could truly afford to in real terms.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. Johnny, anything to add to that?
I think the same thing exists in. I don't know who's listened to this, like whether like there's many business owners or anything like that, but the same thing exists in, especially in the online business world, where everyone's pushing for like arbitrary revenue numbers, right? And
Yeah.
no one ever talks about like net profit margin. It's always gross revenue, but you do.
How to wind up an accountant.
Like, show me your net cash in the bank, and then we'll talk about that. But yeah, you do find yourself just. I think it's kind of a different pressure, and you do have to sort of opt into it rather than it being put on you. But you do find yourself just chasing, like, oh, we need to get this much a month, and then this much a month, and then suddenly you think, well, like, why? Like, what are we going to do with the money? What are we going to do with the profit? So, yeah, I think the same things exist, but I suppose for different reasons. And I think what the corporate world is terrible for is at least when you're running your own business, like, you do reap the rewards of that. So if the business does better, if you generate more revenue, more profit, then you receive that ultimately, if things are structured correctly. But as an employee, you find yourself like pushing hours and hours and hours for the like a senior manager rather than a manager, or a, you know, like another title with an extra £5,000 a year, that by the time it's been taxed, you maybe see, you know, a couple £100 a month or something like that. And so
That's a really good point, because it's so how to demoralize someone is like make them work loads but have no tangible return on what they're doing. And what ends up happening instead, I think you did a business degree as well, Oliver, didn't you?
I did, yeah.
A very kind of business term of satisficing, where people turn up to their jobs, and because there's no return on their additional effort, on additional work, they end up just coming in and just kind of doing sloppy work and just doing the bare minimum, because why wouldn't they? And I see this a lot in healthcare, but it's just because the incentive structures are set up in such a way that you have to, you know, there's very complex regulations and stuff, so people just default to the bare minimum.
Yeah, no, I 100% agree. And what I've seen from some of the startups that are coming up that I've gone to visit are they're very big on culture, very big on like not just adding financial incentives, but kind of like you can go to the gym whenever you want incentive, and you know you can work from home 2 days a week incentive. And you know, going back to that point, it's like not just money that people care about. Yeah, money is a big driver and you want to work towards that, and there needs to be a tangible to hit that. But there's also these other factors that the people, especially young people, that care about in their 20s that they kind of want to focus on.
I can't remember the name of the startup, which is such a shame because it would have been a good example. But like, there's a thing they were doing where you could leave, like they would pay you to leave in the first year or something.
Oh yeah.
Do you remember hearing about this? Like a big payout.
I think it was the shoe company, isn't it? Zap.
That's something like that. Yeah. Zappa the shoe company. Zap. But yeah, that the name Zap or something like that. But anyway, you like in your job interview, if you in your like review interview of however when your probationary period was over, they would say like, I'll pay you X to leave, and they knew the people who stayed were just absolutely there for the right reasons. So I think all these kind of because as Yusuf says, like the incentive really in a standard 9 to 5 corporate job is if you finish your work for the day by 3, like no one really in their right mind, if they're thinking about it, is going to raise their hand and ask for more work, because you've got to stay there till 5 o'clock regardless. You're going to get paid the same regardless. But if you employ this culture of like employees have almost all the freedom they could want, and we're kind of hiring people who care about being here, and we just trust that they'll do the right things, you end up in it with a totally different machine operating in a different way.
Well, I remember you said that you had the opposite, Johnny, where in accountancy, if you clear your desk of the work that you had on your table, then they just give you more. So the incentive is actually opposite. It's like you should be as slow as possible with your work.
Yeah, I think it's finding the like
without getting fired.
Yeah, it's the point where you're doing the amount expected but no more, basically.
Yeah. Love it. And obviously moving on, you guys obviously started running Propane alongside working this finance job and, you know, being an accountant. So you guys, I guess, were pretty busy when it comes to your schedules. And a lot of the kind of people listening to this are people that are busy professionals or leaders that work those kind of days quite a lot. And obviously they use sometimes the excuse of time, right? That the fact that they can't achieve their fitness goals or certain, you know, body transformations. So what do you think you guys have done, kind of like, what are your non-negotiables, and like how did you deal with kind of that big, like, long day and lots of things to do and fitness?
I think probably the answer that Yusuf the method that Yusuf still probably employs today is like, there's not really at least in my opinion, there's not really like a sexy productivity hack for this. It does just sometimes come down. So like when we were building Propane, it was like, for me anyway, it was in at like, arrive home at 7 p.m, food, usually having trained on the way home or sometimes not, or train first thing in the morning, revise for my professional exams, finish at 10, open my personal laptop, work on Propane till like midnight 1, then go to bed. And it like the hours were like messy and shit and not that productive and made lots of mistakes and stuff like that. But I didn't really see it as, I saw it as like something I really like. I couldn't wait to get to do that. So there was never really a feeling of having to like hack my way through it. if that makes sense. So, and I think that's what pushed me actually to leave, because I realized that if I'm just in something that I enjoy doing, then you're not like trying to finish as early as possible or anything like that. So I think that really, sadly, that was the answer. I don't know whether you've got anything to add to that, Yusuf, but
Yeah, sometimes you just have to do that. And I think in this situation, like, we were trying to do two quite hard, time-consuming things together, which is setting up a business and doing a full-time corporate job, which are renowned for being very time-consuming. Same thing happened to me when I quit the corporate job. I went to do something that was equally time-consuming, of a medical degree, and then working as a junior doctor, which, like, the hours are silly, and you're constantly switching between nights and days, and so there is just a big load of hours that you have to get taken up. So on the one hand, like, the question is, how do I make this whole thing easier for myself? Like, if the thing that I'm very poor on right now is time, Juji Mufu, who is you might have seen him, he's like a viral sensation bodybuilder acrobat guy. He, for years, used to work this like really menial, easy admin job in this company that he could have like flexible hours, and it was like 6 hours a day or 5 hours a day, and then he set up his life so that he could just go out and jump around on the grass all day, and he set it up so that he had most of his time, most of his leisure time out in the sunlight, and his job was just to like just literally pay the minimum bill so that he could do what he loved. And over time he ended up kind of having the space and time to build the organic following that he does today, and now he's kind of making a killing online. So that's one side of it. It's like, what's the biggest alligator at the boat? And like, if the goal long term is to build a business, then is working a corporate job full time the best way to go about it? Like, can you go part time? Can you not? Maybe not. Like, sometimes it's not always possible. The other thing is, I think, before looking at any productivity hacks or techniques, is to look at what, because what is more important than how. And so to look at what is your ideal day, what do you want it to look like, and then reverse engineer that. Only then do you start to think, how do I move towards that more efficiently? I think it's very easy to just like bury your head down the rabbit hole and just work really hard, but you end up kind of taking yourself into the wrong direction. Like, the cliche of like, I've spent years climbing up a ladder, and I realized when I got to the top that the ladder was leaned against the wrong building or something. So I think those are two important things. The next step that, again, learned from Johnny, as an accountant and Excel wizard, is what gets measured gets managed. And a lot of people that say they don't have the time would probably be quite loath to tracking their time, and when they do, they realize how many big chunks of the day are spent wasted and could be filled with something that's a bit more useful.
Yeah, 100%. I completely agree. And I found that as well from when I transitioned from uni to working a full-time job and then doing a business. I realized how much time I was wasting at uni when it came to kind of work. Because, you know, when you have a corporate job and then you do a business, you're like, you have not much free time. You know, just like Johnny said, you get home at like 7 after training, you eat, and you're straight on the laptop working again till midnight sort of thing. And I think that as well, prioritization is like a big one. Like, if you know your long-term goal is to not work corporate, then you need to kind of build like either like the systems, so to outsource some things to give yourself some free time, or kind of like a plan that's going to say, okay, I need to be out of here and set a deadline within like, you know, a 6 months or a year. And that's kind of what I did. I said, after 6 months, I don't want to be here anymore. I'm going to find a way to quit and get another income to come in, whether that's freelance to help me do what I want, and move towards kind of that end goal. Because, you know, if you don't have that long-term vision in mind, again, you just plow through tasks and you just keep doing stuff, and you're just digging yourself into a deeper hole of burnout and dissatisfaction, and that never ends well.
I read about a guy a while ago who retired after 5 years. He worked a job that was paying 40 grand a year, so like good but nothing crazy, and he just lived on beans. He had one pair of shoes, he cycled everywhere, he rented like super minimalist, and he put everything into corporate bonds, and he retired after 5 years. And it's like, I mean, that's a pretty extreme lifestyle, but fair play. Like, he's just decided, like, this is the one thing that I want to do above all else. Incidentally, after a couple of years of living his retirement life, he was like, this is quite boring, and also like, I'm having to live off dividends from corporate bonds, so it's still quite a kind of ascetic lifestyle. So he ended up going back to work.
God. What a rubbish ending.
Yeah. He was like,
No magical ending there.
Like, what not to do? Like, trust me, mate, I tried it. Shit. Just keep working.
I think you got a good point there, though. Like, you do need something to work towards. I think a lot of people read like the 4 hour work week. They're like, okay, I do 4 hours of work, and then life's going to be fantastic and great. And I myself like need to be working towards something, otherwise I'll go crazy, right? Whether that's a physique goal, whether that's building a Twitter account, whether that's just running a business. I think most people will go insane if they don't have something to work towards. And I guess that's kind of like a false narrative, isn't it? Like, if you can have all this free time, you'll be fulfilled. But it's actually the opposite. You do want to be working, you do want to be focusing on things, but you want to be focusing on the right things and the things that really like light your fire or whatever that is. Do you know what I mean?
A lot of people get quite ill when they retire because they suddenly all of their energies have, everything that's keeping them going, like the fact that you have to expend energy to produce energy, and then at 65 they stop working and they die within a couple of years, and it's like, sorry to make this podcast take a depressing turn.
It's heavy.
But yeah, like, you lose your purpose and something inside, some kind of live and strive against away. So Ferris' approach of retirement, I think, is taking all of your retirement time to 5 onwards, even be healthy enough to enjoy it, but instead taking like blocks of time throughout your life seems much more sensible.
Yeah, 100%. I agree with that for sure. Amazing. And when you guys were working then, what was kind of like your fitness and your kind of nutrition strategy like, when you kind of working these long days? How did you approach that?
So I think because of Yusuf, I just started getting into powerlifting at the time. So I remember like left at uni, I think most people who are into fitness at uni start living this like life where you're at the gym quite a lot.
Yeah.
Like I experimented with like training twice a day. My contact hours, my degree, especially towards the end, were like very minimal. So it was like, how can I get the absolute most out of my training? And then started pushing that more and more. And then when the corporate world kicked in, I can distinctly remember my training, like my strength dropped off, and I was like, what is going on? And I think it was just the stress of it, trying to juggle two things. So I set myself the target of doing a powerlifting competition, because I thought if I don't have something like that you can kind of see how it slowly slips away from people when like there's always a deadline, there's always something being worked for. So I just got in the habit of training first thing in the morning. And it was like wake up half an hour before my alarm, caffeine tablet, back asleep, wake up at my alarm, caffeine kicked in, go to the gym, really intense training session, and then there's this like hurricane rush, and then you sit at your desk. And that was how I just got through it. It was weird. I don't miss that, but that was it. And so all my nutrition, all my training was just structured around being as competitive in my weight class as possible.
I dread to think of the amount of caffeine we both consumed over those years.
Grams.
A lot.
Grams and grams. Yeah.
Grams. And what about yourself, Yusuf?
So, training strategies, yeah, so very similar. At uni, looking back, I'm like, exactly as you said, Oliver, like, that you only realise it when you're more short on time later on. You're like, man, I could have done so much more with that time. But yeah, training once, twice a day, doing all kinds of ridiculous dietary approaches just because you can. Like, alternate day fasting is quite a notable memory, I think, just because you would eat on Monday, don't eat Tuesday, eat Wednesday, don't eat Thursday, etc. and on the feeding days, you would have between 6,000 and 10,000 calories a day, and you would just default to the most ridiculous foods because you're like, well, I've got to get 10,000 in the next 12 hours. And
so I have a memory, just to interject, of so we were experimenting with alternate day fasting. That was like, we were writing an article on it at the time. We'd read about it. Yusuf was down from Edinburgh, staying with me in York, staying in the flat with my other flatmate who didn't really do any fitness at all. And Yusuf's like, the guy that he's my fitness friend who I run this fitness website with, and he comes into the kitchen in the morning for his breakfast with a pizza and an entire jug of orange juice for his breakfast.
And a cheesecake.
And you're like trying to have that conversation and explain why.
Oh no, it's because of mTOR and AMPK and like.
But yeah, crazy stuff. Sorry, Yusuf, I just had to.
I mean, this is it. Like when you've got a lot of time to spend on stupid things, you end up doing stuff that's just not very efficient. But you know, it's all kind of a bit of a laugh. But when the rubber meets the road and you've got a lot more commitments to deal with, particularly in terms of if you have kids and other things to deal with, you've got to start to be really much more focused with your training. And luckily, there's not a huge it's not a huge commitment. I'm convinced that people can make significant physique progress in 3 or 4 sessions of 40 minutes a week, for 40 minutes per session, and just eating a sensible, consistent diet that doesn't have to be completely extreme. But I think because a lot of the fitness media is quite, or it used to be quite extreme, now it's become almost full circle to the point where, like, what is a diet? Don't even need to go to the gym, don't need to do anything. So that but the point is that if you're working on a restricted timeline, as long as the things that you're doing are very progression focused and you have a very clear physique goal of fat loss or muscle gain and you're working towards that, it doesn't need to consume your life, and it can just be this thing that runs in the background while you're working a busy job or whatever. And as we spoke about last time when you were on our podcast recently, about how that feeds into you and how you function as a whole.
Yeah, 100%. And I think both points there are really interesting. Like Johnny said, you know, waking up in the morning and making like a morning workout a non-negotiable is a good thing to do, especially when you know the rest of your day is going to be busy and filled with stuff. It's just finding the time and making that time and being very kind of, you know, head on with that. And again, like as well, on the flip side, you also don't have to be doing that 5-6 days a week, like Yusuf said, right? You know, when you're training 3-4 days a week with some good progressive overload, getting a good frequency of training in, you know, potentially doing 3 full body days, or, you know, upper body, lower body split, and then repeating that, you know, you actually end up with less niggles and less injuries. Because like when I've experimented with like 3 and 4 days versus like 6 days, I used to just hate the gym. Like I fucking hated it, because I'd have to, you know, I've only get 1 day off. I'd have to make sure I hit it. And, you know, I'd be waking up aching. My mobility would have to increase, more sports massages and shit like that. And actually the return that I was getting, yeah, I would look slightly better than when I trained 3 or 4 days. But actually to have like a good social life, to, you know, have a few rest days, not wake up like with tendons that are about to snap, like 3 and 4 days can work quite well.
Man, flashbacks, yeah, and you're like, I think I only look better because I'm just so inflamed everywhere. But yeah, like the idea of
everywhere.
the idea of waking up and being like, oh, I've been hit by a bus. Oh well, got to train legs this morning. Like it's just relentless. So yeah, having a bit of time to recover is brilliant.
I think it's something that, like, at the time, I suppose, because now if I don't feel that great on a day, like the business and we experience like a direct consequence of that. And before you could just like sit at your desk and just like type away your laptop as a bit of a zombie. But training like that regularly, like training really heavy compound lifts consistently, progressively, consistently overloading all the time, does definitely make you feel like not at the top of your game mentally at work. And like walking around the office like stiff, like having to like lean on things while you're like hot chocolate's making in the, in the machine and stuff like that. You know, it definitely isn't always that helpful when it comes to just being productive at work, versus taking like a more minimalist approach and still ticking the box, like still getting your training volume in, still training a sensible amount, but it not trying to be an athlete while also working long hours at work, I think is important.
This is one of the big philosophical reasons why we think keto is a complete disaster of an idea of a diet. And it's nothing to do with the relative oxidation of carbs and fats or anything like that. It's simply that it's so unpleasant, it's so socially awkward to do, it's so difficult and restrictive for what, like no extra gain, no extra speed of diet. But even if it was 20% faster, it's still not worth it, because you're 80% more difficult. Your life is 80% more unpleasant doing it. So yeah, I totally agree that just like fitting a diet and training program into your life so that it just runs in the background and doesn't make your life unpleasant is the way to stick to something long term.
Yeah, 100%. And keto, I have a very similar view on keto. And whenever somebody kind of asks me, should I do keto to lose weight? I say, yeah, it's fantastic until you want to have a donut. Do you know what I mean? It's great until you want to go out for a few beers with your mate. And like one of my friends actually did keto recently. We went on a night out drinking, and he could only drink like white wine or something like that. And then at the end of the night, he ended up eating McDonald's, and he just felt really guilty for the fact that he had a Big Mac at the end of the night. He's, oh no, I fucked it, I've ruined it. And I'm like, man, your life doesn't have to be that stressful, man. Like, you're adding an extra stress to your life. Just eat some fucking carbs, but just keep it in a calorie controlled way. But
that's it. Like, if you're always just on the edge of going for McDonald's, then, is that?
Yeah, it's just that extra anxiety and worry that you don't need. There's enough of that in life. You don't need any more. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, anything like, and we see this with fitness clients all the time, where it's like on Monday I'm starting this training program, this diet, and normally I really struggle to be consistent for more than a week. So this week I'm going to train 6 days, and I'm going to do 3 cardio sessions, and my calories are going to be lower than I've ever set them before, and I'm going to have all these supplements, and I'm going to drink 5 liters of water a day. And then like 3 days in, they miss, and I'm like, this is stupid anyway, and actually, like, I think it's just human nature, isn't it, where keto kind of appeals to that. It's extreme, it's like, I'm removing all carbs from my diet, so that's got to work, and it makes sense that it's hard, because then I'll get the results because it's hard, and there's that like badge that you get to wear that you haven't had carbs in 10 days or whatever. But it's the reality of it, of like on a night out when you just want to be with your friends and like have a couple of chicken selects, and you can't, because even they have more carbs than you're allowed. It's like,
so this is something you'll be alarmed by, Johnny, and so Oliver and I are well aware of this, because we're really cool and we're on Twitter and stuff, but Johnny is away from it, doesn't have a Twitter.
Yeah,
Keto
have a Twitter.
Is alive and well. It's rife, and the people that follow it in 2020 are so religious about it that there's just no, like, they're more fanatical than the religious zealots that I've seen. It's amazing.
Yeah, it's a cult. It's a cult.
Presumably it works for them consistently. So
I don't know that it does, but it's amazing, because like they obviously have like search triggers that as soon as someone mentions the word keto, you'll get people who like you aren't following you or anything just start like responding and getting really violent with you, and you're like, whoa, like they're obviously waiting for the keyword keto to come up so that they can come in and defend it.
I think the warning flag is like when you get offended about someone saying something about like the food you eat on a daily basis. Like, if that's happening, there's something else going on there, isn't there? It's like, so I'm happy for someone to say to me, keto works. It's like, yeah, that's fine. Like, I don't need to be convinced of it. Like, I just don't really want to do it. But if someone gets offended by the idea of it not being sustainable, most restaurants don't serve, like, there's not a section on the menu that's keto in a lot of places. So it is just more tricky to fit into a normal life, I guess.
Yeah. And I think that there's a big kind of like social attachment and kind of identity that people put towards their diets. You find that they feel like if you attack the fact that they eat keto and you can actually lose weight with carbs, you're personally victimizing them and attacking them in a sense. And it's kind of like, you're going to get that angry about just eating meat. Is it really like, that it's so stupid when you think about it. And the approach I always take is kind of like diet diagnostics, right? When you look at the fact that each diet has a different benefit at a different time. So some days I may be quite keto and very low carb if I've maybe eaten a lot on the weekend, or for some reason that I will kind of want to drop some fat very quickly. Some days I like intermittent fasting because I don't want to have breakfast, but then there's other days where I'm going to be none of those. I'm just going to decide to fuck it all off. And that's really the approach that you should be taking, is taking the best from each one and then kind of integrating that into your lifestyle depending on what that is and what your goals are looking like.
I've seen this with you. You're very like open-minded and kind of flexible in the way that you think and apply these tools with the fitness content that you put out. And also, I think it kind of gives rise to, and I think we're all like this, of the idea that if you're easily offended by stuff all the time, that in fact I think you wrote something about this the other day, saying like the problem is you.
Yeah.
It's a bad way to allocate your resources. If you're going around like looking for things to be personally upset by, there's a huge amount of mental space that's being put into something that whoever made the offensive comment probably doesn't care.
Yeah. Yeah. It's very true. It's a waste of mental bandwidth to kind of get angry and offended by people, especially on the internet, I think.
And it is. I think the person being the source is almost always true. I think because most people who were around in the fitness industry, so like pre-evidence based wave, where like legitimately no one really knew what was going on. It was like, is it insulin? Because it might be insulin. And I think the way we like arrived at the conclusion was like, if it's the case that low carb's the answer, that doesn't explain Ronnie Coleman, Phil Heath, Jay Cutler. Like, it also doesn't explain Martin Burkhan, Kino Body. You know, like, if it's 6 meals a day, what's Martin Burkhan doing? Like, how's he pulling that off? So none of these like silos can explain each other, and I think that's where they like. If you had to explain it to a jury of like the Mark Zuckerberg equivalent sat in front of Congress, but you've got to convince them that keto's the answer, and someone asks you basic questions, it falls down so quickly that it just cannot by itself be the only thing. And usually when you take anything like that and probe at the person who thinks that it is, they get really cross. So it's best to just like, stay away. And that's why I don't have a Twitter account. No, I'm joking. It's not. But it doesn't surprise me that it's not still alive and well. Or that it is still alive and well.
Yeah, for sure. No, that makes a lot of sense. I guess another thing that would be really interesting to talk about is kind of productivity, right? So a lot of the guys listening to this are kind of professionals either working remotely or not very, much in the office. And, us guys, we've got quite a lot of experience of kind of working for ourselves. So we've kind of built that structure. So I guess what would kind of be your tips? And, I think, Yusuf, you'll love this, kind of your non-negotiables of working from home to kind of be more productive.
Working from home is such a double-edged sword. I'm so happy that 2020 has maybe opened the window for everyone to start working from home and kind of decentralize the idea that we have to all live in an office in London and be, because like if you've read Deep Work by Cal Newport, he talks about the kind of destruction of deep focus from open plan offices. The fact that you could be trying to do something and then like Karen from accounts comes over and asks you something and pulls you out of your flow, and then it takes you like 10 minutes to get back to where you were. Like, this adds up so quickly, and if you're just immediately accessible, you're never going to get into deep flow. You never get anything done. Now, this switching time is key. Now, I think the problem is people take that open plan office weakness of, yes, you get interconnectivity and the synergy of all these kind of loose ties and stuff, but you never get anything deep done. Now, they take that problem and they move it into the remote work environment where they've always got Slack open or some team communication channel, and then it's no better than being in an open plan office. People can still bother you in what you're doing. So my personal approach would be get yourself one of these. For anyone listening on iTunes, this is a Pomodoro Timer. It's an analog what's it called? Hourglass. And use that to do distinct blocks of time. Pick a task that you're going to do, shut everything else off, Wi-Fi off if you can, and just complete the task. And then do your inbox checking and shallow work, and alternate between deep and shallow work rather than do this kind of grey, sludgy kind of work where you're straddling between both.
Yeah, I agree with that. Johnny, anything to add to that?
So yeah, the task switching thing's a huge waste of time for people, which I think you really become aware of it when we recently did an exercise like as a team in Propane where you track everything you do every 30 minutes for a week, and you've got to just be as honest as possible, and that is painful. that exercise, because like you
Wow.
realize, you think you're really productive, and you get to the end of the day and you're like, I've really done anything, like, but I've checked a lot of things, but I haven't actually completed anything. So I think getting a handle on what it is you actually do, and then for me, I think the biggest impact on personal like output is being able to effectively forecast what I actually can do. So like, how long does something take? So if you're going to say I'm going to work for 8 hours, take maybe half an hour lunch break. It's like, right, okay, that's the hard landscape. So what is actually realistic? Because most people, when they write a to-do list, put like 14 things down. They're like, oh, I'm definitely going to get all of these done. And you get like halfway through the day and you've done one, and you feel a bit stressed about it. And then the stress means that you don't do any of the rest of the list, and then you feel behind, etc. Whereas if you look at the 7 hours and you think, okay, I've got this many things to do for the week, that'll take me 90 minutes, that'll take me an hour. So slot that in, buffer each side, and then suddenly you reach the end of the day and like you just match your expectations, so that there's less anxiety, you feel more on top of things, because your ability to take the things you've got to do, forecast how long they'll take, and allocate time to those appropriately. And that, I think that's a skill that's really, really hard. It sounds so simple, but it's really hard to do. If you combine that with what Yusuf's saying of like, okay, I have to produce this report by Wednesday, so on Monday it'll take me 2.5 hours. On Monday I'm going to do 2 blocks of deep work on that thing. Suddenly it all just becomes really simple to do, versus what most people do with like the scatty sort of task switching, because we're all sort of under this weight of a to-do list that's always growing, no matter how many things we do. So I think forecasting and having correct expectations of what's realistic on a daily basis is so important.
Yeah, I love that. I definitely agree with those both as well. The fact of like sticking time to tasks is really important, and also like realizing that like you don't have to get through like your to-do list. Like there are like tasks that really need priority, and there are tasks that don't. And I used to fall into the trap of, if I complete 25 tasks today, I've achieved a lot. But it's like, well, let's break it down a minute. What actually are these tasks? And are you actually moving the needle in what you need to do? And I guess as business owners, we kind of know that a little bit more, because we're attuned to like, we need to fucking get some money, otherwise we're broke, right? Whereas if you come maybe from like a professional space, potentially this may not be true, you may just not prioritize as well. But I kind of like split my to-do list into 2 places, where I say, okay, this is shit that really needs to be done, and this is stuff that does not need to be done, right? So like, writing tweets does not need to be done, despite the fact I end up doing it quite a lot, right? So you need to look at it in kind of that like black and white of, right, really focused work, this can be done, shallow work while I'm chilling, listening to music, and it can be a bit more relaxed. I think prioritizing that's really key for people when they're especially working from home.
Yeah, on that note, the Eisenhower matrix is something people find very helpful, which is, as you described, you have 2 columns and 2 rows: urgency and importance. So urgency on the vertical, importance on the horizontal. And so you have these 4 quadrants. Now, I've been signed out, but I'm still on the call, weird. So urgent things that are urgent and important are the things that need to be done right now. They're the fires that are burning. Then you have urgent, not important. Those are the things that you need to delegate. Then you have important, not urgent. They're the things that tend to never really get done. They're the things that, like, because they can always get deferred, even though they're the things that really will actually move you forward in a year's time, they keep getting put on the back burner. So they need to be scheduled in. And then finally we have not important, not urgent. They just need to be sacked off.
Yeah.
And we all have one of those quadrants where we're best at dealing with and that we're worst with dealing with. And I think that's where the challenge lies, in looking at that matrix and being like, right, today, that's what needs to be done.
Yeah, 100%. I think that's a great way to kind of like prioritize things for sure. And I found, using some like apps are really useful as well, to kind of just build some systems to kind of save time. And I know you guys are kind of big on apps. So what kind of apps would you recommend that people can use to kind of increase that productivity? Whether that's kind of like to-do lists, app blockers, anything like that.
There's a potential here that you'll start a fight between me and Yusuf.
Oh no.
So I think we both use something called Cold Turkey, which is an app for Mac. I don't think it exists for PC, but basically it blocks whatever you want it to block. So any application, any website, and then it has a hardcore mode called Frozen Turkey, where it just locks you out your laptop without any option. So like I used to use this to. I think one of the hardest things about working from home is boundaries, because there is no boundary, right? You could just work all evening. Um, but if your laptop you can't work past a certain time, there's not really an option, and it is permanent. So like I've had a situation where it locked me out, and I then needed to get back in to get something, and literally couldn't. So that's a great tool. For task management, I use OmniFocus, which is just a to-do list manager. But something that's great with that, which is another like quick tip that people can start applying, is don't misuse due dates for things, and like reminders at a certain time, unless it absolutely has to happen then, because you just learn to ignore them. So like we've all had something where we'll set something as like due on Monday, but it's not really due on Monday. It's just when we want to get it done, and then it's like sat on our to-do list reminder red for like 3 days after, and then we just learn to ignore due dates. Right? It's just it's not something you take seriously. So OmniFocus has a defer function and lots of other things. So I use OmniFocus for that. But Yusuf doesn't use OmniFocus. Yusuf uses.
I use TickTick, which
You love
is
it.
very similar. But to be honest, I'm probably gonna get slowly reeled in by OmniFocus from Johnny. The reason OmniFocus is arguably a more complete system is that it is that it follows the GTD framework, the David Allen getting things done. And it's very, if you're very strictly in that following that method, it's designed specifically for that. The only thing is the user interface isn't quite as smooth. It's not quite as like fun to use. So yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, like there's whole channels that play off between Todoist and Things and TickTick or whatever. I think if you've got something that does your to-do list, and you can tag and separate lists so you have projects and due dates and that kind of thing, which they all mostly do, then great. The other type of app that I think is very it's just indispensable now is some kind of external brain. Now, every classic one, it's recently been being overtaken by Notion and by Rome Research, or Obsidian, and these kind of new networked thought things. Again, I don't think there's one that's better than the other. They depend on your style of thinking. So Notion is very much nested databases, and it's very good for dynamic notes and shared collaborative notes and working on projects, and you can see things as a table in the calendar or whatever. Whereas Evernote is just a raw indexing of data, of written like text data. So it's very good for like, long form text data. Something like Rome Research is good for kind of networking and joining ideas, and if you're a deep thinker and you do a lot of like academic research, it's great for that kind of thing. But at the end of the day, all of those apps kind of come under the bracket of external brain, which is having a storage mechanism to retrieve data that you couldn't store in your actual brain because it's just too long form.
Yeah, 100%. And I'm very big on kind of the external brain after watching your video, Yusuf, because
Nice.
it's really easy to kind of say to yourself, I'm going to memorize all this stuff, but kind of using like Evernote or even just basically like notes, anything that comes into your head, you just fire out and kind of categorize that can make such a big difference. Again, Johnny, with to-do lists, I think you're right. Like there's so many different ones that you can get, but you just want to find one that works for you, whether that's TikTok, whether that's OmniFocus, whatever it is. You just want to find it really and get used to it, which is cool.
You've got to use it ultimately. I think that's people think, oh, I'll just put loads of stuff into a to-do list app and then I'm productive, but you've got to actually interact with it on a daily basis. So if you don't like it, then that's a bit of a problem.
Yeah, for sure. And lastly, guys, what are your 3 tips each that you would give to a busy professional that is looking to stay fit?
I'm going to hot potato you, Yusuf.
Okay. So pick a goal. Don't try and recomp or do any bullshit. Like just pick a I want to be leaner or I want to be bigger and gain muscle. And if you're not quite as lean as you're happy with, the answer always defaults to get leaner first. Then set a sensible calorie deficit or calorie surplus depending on your goal, and just adjust as you go along. If you're working in a corporate job, you can afford a coach. Hire someone like Oliver, the worker coach, and get yourself, just hand it all over to someone. You've only got a certain amount of bandwidth to spend on this kind of thing, and so hiring a coach means that you open up that bandwidth, and all you have to do is turn up and train, turn up and eat, and then you don't have to worry about fussing around with the details.
Amazing.
I would say, so I suppose all of this becomes irrelevant if you hire a coach, because you don't have to do anything. You just follow their advice. But as general principles, I think always try and get the most from the least. So always try and make progress by making the fewest changes first, rather than doing the whole like baby bathwater and doing keto and hit cardio 5 days a week and all that sort of stuff. So like if you can make like 3 changes to your training, nutrition, lifestyle, and suddenly the scale starts moving in the right direction, you start building muscle, whatever the goal is, then great. Like you've got all the cards in your hand still to play. Something that, it's one of those things that like everyone tells you should do, and you hear it and you're like leave me alone, and you still don't do it, but you still absolutely should, is just like really prioritize sleep. Because especially when you're working and stressed, everything is absolutely harder, from training, like staying full, managing satiety, managing concentration. Everything's harder on 6 hours sleep than it is on 8 hours sleep, even though you think you're too good for it. And then probably like I would try, and if I had to go back and train through like my professional hours in accountancy training again, I'd have probably picked a training program and like a nutritional strategy that was more focused around like how I actually felt a lot of the time, rather than seeing my like body as this thing that I had to trash in the gym 4 or 5 days a week. Because it might work when you're like 18, but you do ultimately just pay the price of that. You might not realize it because you're so used to it, but you probably do feel like tired, under recovered, and it just makes, again, everything harder.
Yeah, I agree with those. Firstly, with Yusuf's, I think the goal thing's a big one, isn't it? When people are like, oh, I'm going to do a recomp, I want to lose fat and build muscle at the same time. I want to be shredded and I want to add, 30 kilos to my squat. It's kind of like, hang on a minute, you need to maybe just focus on one of them, because you're not Superman. And I agree with Johnny there as well. You don't need to be battering your body and, posting quotes like go hard or go home to get results, right? You just need to find a sustainable way to make progress whilst also optimizing recovery, and sleep is such a big way in doing that. For sure. Amazing, gents. Well, I appreciate you both coming on. Before we round off, do you just want to plug where everybody can find you, connect with you, chat with you, and all that beautiful stuff?
Sure. So we basically have 2 businesses at this point. So for all fitness advice, we also generally work with busy professionals. So for all fitness advice, you just go to propanefitness.com. If you have heard this and you think, online business sounds fun, then we have all our guides and a free like case study on how we built Propane Fitness at propane-business.com. We couldn't get propanebusiness.com because someone wanted an extortionate amount of money for it, but propane
£35,000.
Really?
Said.
Yeah. That is extortion, man.
But he's going to be sat waiting for the next propanebusiness.com buyer to come along, which might be
someone selling propane as a business.
Yeah, that's what it'll be.
For sure. Amazing, gents. Well, a big thank you for coming on. Really enjoyed the conversation. And yeah, if you're listening, guys, make sure you check out Johnny and Yusuf, check out their website, Twitter, and also the Instagram page that they've got as well. And yeah, amazing, gents. I'm sure we'll speak again soon.
Thank you, man.
All right, man.
It's been a
Thanks
pleasure.
for having us.